At this time, we're going to start with the Fisheries Management Committee, and I'm going to call on Chairperson Jim Bledsoe, please.
Thank you, Chairman McMillan. I'm Jim Bledsoe, Chairman of the Fisheries Committee, and I'd like to recognize Bobby Wilson, Chief of the Fisheries Division, talk about the sport fishing recommendations and the commercial fishing proclamation recommendations.
Thank you, Commissioner Bledsoe. Just for your information, I'm going to talk first about the sport fish, and then Eric Gaines, who is our statewide commercial fishing and mussling coordinator, is going to talk about commercial fishing proposed changes. And then I'm going to speak about the recommendations or the requests made by the Commercial Fishing Advisory Committee back in January. And just real quick reminder about how we go about setting our regulations and the input that we get. In April, we asked for public recommendations, usually about the end of March or 1st of April, for about a month, and then we consider those recommendations a little bit later at our biologist meeting. In the meantime, the regional staff and law enforcement folks also, they develop recommendations, pass around their regions, and all that's brought forward to our biologists, as I mentioned in May. From that point, we talk about recommendations that may go out to the regions again and to the state for consideration. I want to say the state, I'm talking about the staff and fishery staff. And then in August, we bring that up at our staff meeting. And then we go to the preview, which is where I am today. So this is just a preview. From this point on, for the sport fish anyway, we'll have a 45-day public comment period. And then at the commission meeting in October, the commission will vote on any proclamation changes. And then the new fishing guide will prepared and is printed in the November through February. And of course, the effective date for the regulations will be March the 1st. So on the sport fish, we'll start with the statewide, and really the only thing we have is relatively minor, and that has to do with crayfish. Currently, you can catch crayfish for bait, but there's some uncertainty among the TWRA folks as whether you can actually catch them and keep them to eat. So we want to put some language in there in a proclamation to make it legal to harvest them for consumption. We haven't got the specific language drawn up yet, but we'll have that by October. And as well, after talking about the crayfish, we realized that in the live bait proclamation, which I'm not talking much about today, there's a couple of methods that were left out when the live bait proclamation was implemented about 3 years ago. And there's a couple of species that we may have to amend or add to it as well. So we may end up opening up the live bait proclamation in October as well, but it's for some relatively minor changes. I'm going to go through these, and then if you want to, we'll just wait and ask questions at the end of the presentation. Okay. So in Region 1, dealing with agency lakes, specifically Browns and Maples Creek Lake, currently there is a 10-inch length limit on crappie in the lake, and after some age and growth analysis, looking at how fast the crappie grow and how big they are based on their age, we realize that they're not growing as fast as they typically do in a good environment like Kentucky Lake or Reelfoot Lake or any of the lakes that have good growth rates. And some of these fish are not even growing to be catchable before they die out, before they get 10 inches. So we're recommended to reduce that length limit on crappie in Browns and Maples Creek Lake to 8 inches. We did this last year at Whiteville Lake, and we also have done it at Glen Springs Lake. And so this is just, the fishermen should be okay with this. On Kentucky Reservoir, dealing with Sauger, those of you, specifically those of you in western Tennessee, may have heard and talked about and heard from fishermen that the Sauger fishing is just not very well lately. And this is just estimated harvest based on our creel surveys up through 2011. As you can see, it nosedive in 2011. It was a little bit of a pickup in 2012, but this past year, the Sauger fishing was not very good. It could be related to high water, but we suspect it has more to do with the population. And a little bit of history about the background of the regulations. In 1949, there was just a creel limit of 10 fish. And that you can see through the years that's changed back and forth, different creel limits, but in 1992, we put a length limit on there, a 14-inch minimum size limit with a creel limit of 15. It was the only lake, Kentucky Lake was the only lake with a 14-inch length limit at the time. The statewide length limit was 15 inches, but we elected to go with 14, and we tried that for 20 years. As you can see, 97, 98, 99, 2001, the length limit stayed the same, but the creel limit went back and forth. And people have asked, well, why don't you just adjust the creel limit to less than 10? And so looking at this creel reduction analysis from a couple of years that we did some creel surveys and were able to get the lengths of the various, the number of fish harvested per angler, we realized that if you just reduced it to 7 fish, you're only impacting about 4.7%. But reducing it to 5 is really only 15.4. To really make a difference, you'd have to cut it down to 1 or 2 or maybe 3. So we're not going to recommend that. Another thing that we go by is the Sauger female maturity index. A 14-inch Sauger on Kentucky Lake, they only protect about 14% of the spawning females. And if we go to 15-inch, we can protect about 31% of the spawning females. So the recommendation for that for Kentucky Lake is to increase. When I say Kentucky Lake, it really talking about mostly below Pickwick Dam, and that's still Kentucky Lake, and that's where most of the fishing takes place. But it'll be lake-wide regulation. But propose increasing the size limit from 14 to 15 inches, keep the creel limit at 10 fish, and we're going to continue to try to stock from 150,000 to 200,000 fingerlings below the dam. We've been able to stock some Sauger below the dam for the last 3 or 4 years, but we're going to try to get that number up to 150,000 or 200. Region 2, we have a very minor change. Montgomery Bell State Park, Woodhaven Lake is a lake that was renovated about 20 years ago. And when it was renovated, it was restocked with Florida bass, and they had a regulation on there of no harvest at all of any bass. And when we had a meeting, our agency folks, staff had a meeting there back in July. I was looking on their website and realized they had a different regulation on their website than what we actually have in a proclamation. So we asked our fisheries guys to talk with the state park people, and they've recommended to change that no harvest of largemouth bass to the regular statewide regulation. That's basically a creel limit of 5 bass. There's no length limit on there. And this will help out with overall population, because I'm sure with no harvest of bass over the last 20 years, there's probably a lot of crowd. It's crowded with a lot of small bass. So this will allow the harvest of some of those smaller bass too. In Region 3, we'll talk about muskie. And specifically, we're going to talk about the Caney Fork watershed and the Collins River watersheds, located, as you know, around Center Hill Lake and above. This is a little bit better diagram, but we're talking about mostly the Caney Fork River below Center Hill Dam and above below Great Falls Dam and above Great Falls Dam into the 3 major rivers that feed into it are the Calf-Killer River, the Caney Fork River, and the Collins River. But it's also the Great Falls Reservoir. But based on some research and also some recommendations that we've been thinking about for the last few years, but we sort of pinned it down based on the research that we got from Tennessee Tech. They looked at some things like if there was natural reproduction occurring, what was happening to the tagged muskie that were put in there, and a few other things. We found it's mostly there is natural reproduction occurring, but we're not really protecting the spawning females with a 36-inch length limit. That's what we have now. So what we're recommending is for muskie, the current length limit of 36 inches is to go to a 50-inch length limit. And this would basically be in the Caney Fork River watershed, because there are some muskie in Center Hill Lake in the very upper end of the lake. We want to have this regulation in place for that area as well as above the dam, and that includes the Great Falls Reservoir and the Caney and the Collins and the Rocky and all the rivers that go into it. There's this particular area is becoming very popular with muskie fishermen from all over the country, and they've had tournaments there, catch and release tournaments, and a lot of the locals, from what the regional folks tell me, would support this, as well as the law enforcement people. Polk County streams. Currently in Big Lost, Goforth, and Spring Creeks, they allow fishing there just about every day except for Fridays, from March 1 through July 1. And the reason they don't allow it on Fridays is because that's typically the day they try to stock trout. Most people can't afford to take off on Fridays to go up there and fish, so they may camp in that area, and they may not be able to fish until Saturday. If we stock them on Fridays, a lot of times the people that can take off work will get in there and maybe fish them out, or it won't be fair for the guys and the families that go up there to fish on weekends. So that's why we have this regulation in place for these three creeks. And it's single hook only, and basically during daylight hours only. And we try to stock up there about every other week. We're proposing to change that end date to June 1, because we don't really stock after the 1st of June up there. It's pretty much from March 1 to June 1. And we want to add these other creeks, Greasy Creek, Tumbling Creek, and Turtletown Creek, because they're not currently on that regulation that does not allow them to fish on Fridays. Region 4, in these three reservoirs, Chilhowee, Fort Loud, and Melton Hill, currently there's a regulation, the walleye and sauger combination. They have to be 15 inches long. There's a creel limit of 10. They can be, any combination of those two fish, but they have to be at least 15 inches long, but you can keep 10. The recommendation from the region is to change that to the statewide regulation, which is a 16-inch length limit for walleye with only a creel limit of 5 per day, and sauger would remain at 15 inches with 10 per day. And then the Cherokee Reservoir, in the upper end of the reservoir, there's a paddlefish snagging season. It's not open to commercial fishing, but there's a pretty good snag fishery has developed there over the years. And above Cherokee Reservoir, there's the John Sevier power plant. It used to be a steam plant. It's been converted over to a gas plant, or natural gas or propane plant. So there's no heated effluent. In the past, when it was a steam plant, it was the warm water coming out of there in the wintertime. The paddlefish would migrate up in that area a little bit earlier, around the 1st of March. And so we allowed a paddlefish snag season of March 1 to 15th. Well, since they've gone to this new plant, they don't have a warm water discharge, and we have to rely on Mother Nature to warm the water up. So now the paddlefish don't go up there until around the 1st of April. So we're proposing to change that season from March 1 through the 15th to April 1 to 15th. In Rocky Fork boundary, this is a change due to the U.S. Forest Service closing some of the roads up in the Cherokee National Forest. And this is just specifically a change in the identification of the boundary. And then I just want to mention about Muskie and Melton Hill, because it's come up a time or two. The Bull Run Steam Plant, in the wintertime when it's in operation, they have a warm water discharge. And then in the wintertime, when water's real cold, and they have that warm water discharge coming out, that attracts a lot of bait fish, which attracts muskie, and that attracts fishermen. And there's been some concern, you've probably heard from some of the muskie fishermen and others over the years about concern over the catch of these, and a lot of the fishermen up there fish on the bank and use live bait, and they catch them and they show them off and they take pictures of them, and they might mishandle them and they die. And that's the concern, that's the perception. That's not necessarily what's happening. But so we said we would do a survey of the people that fish in that area to see what kind of method they would, what if there was a restriction place, what would they prefer? We're looking at either a close an area off completely, or a bait restriction, or maybe a hook restriction where they couldn't use live bait and maybe have to use circle hooks or something like that. And so we were going to conduct interviews, and one of the things we did find out from the interviews that we conducted was that most of the people fishing up there were fishing just for whatever they could catch. But there were people that were fishing for muskie. The numbers were low, however, because we were only able to interview 10 people in the 2011, 2012 because they didn't even, or they hardly used the Bull Run steam plant at all, so there was no warm water discharge. And the same thing happened this past year, although they did use it for a little bit longer, we only interviewed 24 people. So I just bringing this up to let you know that don't feel like we've been able to interview enough people to find out a true feeling of what kind of restriction, if any, they would prefer. So we're going to hold it off for at least another year. If it's a cold winter, if we use the Bull Run steam plant, or if the Bull Run steam plant is in use and there's a warm water discharge, maybe there'll be more fishermen there and we can get some more interviews. That's all for the sport fish. Are there any questions from the commission?
Thank you, Bobby. Is there any questions from the commission? Commissioner Grigg?
Down around Browns Creek Lake, Bobby, that's where my mom and daddy used to pick cotton right down the road, and grew up in that area. And I noticed on the crappie when Mr. Rizzuto, Region 1, did his shocking. What about other sports fish in the lake? Were they decreasing in growth and length?
No, no indication there. The bass and the bluegill, for the most part, are doing fine. The catfish are too. They're in good shape. They got a regulation there on that slot limit, allows the harvest of those smaller bass, so that the other bass can grow to bigger size, and it protects those medium-sized bass, even bigger bass.
Still, the state record crappie came from Browns Creek Lake.
4 pounds, 4 ounces.
And also, they shocked at what would have been the state bass record.
Right.
correct?
I think it was 16 pounds, 15 ounces, and 2 or 3 years ago. Nobody ever caught it. We let it go. We took a fin clip off, and turns out it was a Florida bass too, by the way.
It's a good little lake to fish in.
Mhm.
Thank you, Mr. Bobby.
I noticed through there, we'd heard some time back about the Florida strain of the Kentucky the state record spotted bass might have
Right.
had Florida strain in it or something. Did we have any issues brought up about that, or?
No, it's actually what it is on the spotted bass, there's a native spotted bass, and then there's what's been introduced is what they used to call the Alabama spotted bass. A lot of the geneticists and even the American Fisheries Society has now recognized the Alabama spotted bass as a separate species and not a subspecies of a spotted bass, so they call it the Alabama bass. And we have it in Parksville Reservoir, and we've also found it in a few other places in that area, but concern is that they will interbreed with the smallmouth bass and dilute the genetics of the smallmouth bass so that you have crosses of the Alabama bass and the smallmouth bass, which has happened in a couple of lakes in Georgia close by. But we've not done anything other than increase the creel limit. Last year we did that on the spotted bass in that lake. I believe it's 15.
Thank you, Bobby. Any other questions?
I've got a question too. Bobby, on the Sauger, is overfishing the problem?
Well, we don't exactly know. We don't know if it's habitat or the water release system that's taking place now or what it is. It could be, but we know that we've got to try something different. And we know that protecting 1 more inch up to 15 inches will protect almost double the number of spawning females in there that are protected now. And with that in combination with stocking, we think hopefully we'll bring them back again.
What can you do to try to solve that issue? I mean, if it's not overfishing, it kind of doesn't make any difference what you do. It seems like to me it's going to still be affected.
Well, there's a lot of pressure from fishermen to fish that body of water. I may be speaking out of turn because Tim Broadbent is here. He might want to comment on it, but where's Tim?
He's sitting over, he's asleep over here.
Is it overfishing, Tim?
Actually, could be overfishing. We've got tremendous fishing pressure down there. On Sauger, Sauger reproduce below the dam. You concentrate fishermen and fish in the same area. We're finding that the fish that we have are harvested right at 14 inches. They're not given opportunity to get much bigger.
All right.
So we can produce more fish, so we can protect more and get more to survive but before the drought of 86, 87, 88, the average weight of Sauger in that area is nearly 2 pounds. Now it's right about 1.2 pounds. So it's been a big change, and fishing pressure does have an impact on it.
Well, that graph had a steady decline on it. It didn't look like it was a,
It's been a steady decline for a long time. So, yeah, fishing pressure does have a lot to do with it.
on second question, the 14-inch increase in muskie is a huge jump. Are you sure the public down there is going, fishermen are going to accept that? I mean, that's going,
We have that same regulation at Melton Hill and Del Hall Lake for muskie, because those are, especially Melton Hill, it's considered a trophy muskie fishery, and this is considered a trophy muskie fishery too. I think most of the fishermen are in favor of it. The ones that won't be happy are probably the ones that don't like the 36-inch anyway. So, but Region 3, there, Mark?
I'd like to speak to that. 2 summers ago, we had a public meeting for people that fish for muskie. And we had representatives from just about all over the state. The folks in that area that fish the Collins, fish up the Caney Ford, they were interested in a larger length limit. On the Collins, it's a small river. There's really good access. It's gaining in popularity. If we've got natural reproduction there, it makes sense to protect those females and keep them in there. What we'd like to see is just a sustainable population. And what you've seen there with the muskies, both in the Collins and up on the plateau in the Emory Watershed, is a restoration of a native fish. So that's what we're trying to do, is just maintain a sustainable fishery.
that just seemed like a huge jump at one
It's
time.
big. It is big, but we factored in the research that we did. We had angler opinions from that area, so we've got support in that area.
Okay,
for
good.
it.
Tim, is there any, I'm still getting complaints down there at Pickwick about the shad. They're going to Wilson or somewhere else to catch them, and there's plenty of them, and there's none at Pickwick. Do you have, what's the,
This survey, not 2 or 3 weeks ago, we selected 2 or 300 shad. I mean, the shad are there. I don't know why they're not catching them.
well, it's the fishermen have been fishing there for 50 years. They,
We've had a lot of discharge this year now. It's been, the gates were open for 3 solid months, and then they've been open here late, so it could have something to do with it. When you talked to Bobby and Bobby talked to me, we did a sample. We saw several hundred shad and skipjack and
okay,
redfin and gibber. So
all right,
we'll keep that. We sample down there every. We'll keep it.
okay.
Wow.
What's the difference in a crawfish and a crayfish?
Depends on where you from.
Where you from? Crawdad, mudbug.
All right, any other questions from the commission on the sport fishing? Any questions from the audience? Back to you, Bobby.
Okay, Eric, you wanna come up here and talk about the commercial fishing?
I'll be discussing the commercial fishing proposed regulation changes for the upcoming season. First, we'll be talking about the Beach River. There was or has been confusion over whether or not the Beach River is a embayment or a river itself. We've decided to look at that and open that up to waters open to commercial fishing, to allow trot lines, slap baskets, and turtle traps. I've got a picture showing it'll be from Highway 69 Bridge to Kentucky Lake. It's roughly a 10-mile stretch of water. So that's the first proposed. The next one will be allowing turtle traps under the Group B reservoir in the Kentucky Lake. Commercial fishing is already allowed in the embayments, and this would just allow for another type of commercial fishing. Again, this is a turtle trap, in fact, one of our embayments. So that's another proposal. Again, another proposal, we have a statewide season for turtle harvest. This includes Reelfoot as well as, of course, the statewide from March 1 to October the 31st. With changing the season on Reelfoot, as well as statewide. We had a few other changes we would like to bring in. One is the harvest of all turtle species. We would like to define specific species and change the language in commercial proclamation to allow for 14 species. One example here is red ear slider. I have the list of species. There'll be red ear slider, soft shell turtles, paint turtles, and map turtles listed. Also, under the general provisions, we'll be looking at deleting the word inlet. Some confusion, it's a little vague in the language. With that change, we're hoping that areas that are closed will be addressed more specifically with deleting that word inlet. Also, under the general provisions, we'll be looking at allowing hoop nets to be fished January to December, and also allowing or specifying that wings and leads will not be permitted to use on hoop nets. The current hoop net season is from October to April. The example here is a hoop net. The hoop closest to you is where they would normally tie the lead. In the definition, they would not be able to use this with wings or leads on it, so it would function specifically as a hoop net. So, let's see. Oh yeah. This is the opening of the net here. There's a throat that goes in. They'll usually have a wing. It's kind of a panel of mesh that'll go from either the left or the right side. They can have one down the center, so it would guide fish directly into the opening of that hoop net, so it would increase the capture of that gear. So we're changing that because of another proposal that Bob will be addressing under the CFAC recommendations. And lastly, with the language putting in that to not allow leads and wings on the hoop nets, we're going to restrict the mesh size of wings and leads on fight nets, trap nets, and pound nets to 1 inch. So it won't allow entanglement of other fish whenever they're using this specific gear type for commercial fishing. And with that, that's all that I have. Bobby Wilson will be addressing the CFAC recommendations. Is there any questions?
All right, any questions from the commission for Eric?
It seems like in recent years, the definition of stream keeps changing. Do we have a clear definition of that? And I'm probably looking to David back here or whoever. TDEC seems to be changing it on us, and I was wondering if we've got a clear definition.
The way streams are defined, Commissioner, has mostly to do with how permits are issued for aquatic alteration. I don't think that any of that really affects our sport fishing or commercial fishing.
Okay.
It has more to do with how permits are required for in-stream activities.
Do we have a definition for streams?
It's a lengthy process to define a stream versus a wet weather conveyance. I mean, that's where the discussion is defining a stream as compared to what is not a stream.
A lot of times TDEC's definition is where 2 raindrops meet and move.
They've developed a whole science to avoid that.
We're okay.
We're good.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the commission for Eric? Do I hear any any questions from the audience? Come to the mic and please state your name.
I'm Ricky Scott. I'm the chairman of the Commercial Fishing Advisory Board. And I just got one question for Eric. Is that all right? Does, on the Beach River, I know we've been able to fish gill nets in the past. Will this mean we won't be able to fish gill nets on the Beach River?
These are just proposals. If you would like to open up discussion more on that, I know that's part of the confusion that we're discussing. If you would like to bring that more, I guess, to Bobby and the regional staff, we would like to discuss that
Okay.
at length.
Well, the commercial fishermen would like to be able to still fish, for buffalo, carp, whatever, in there like we have before. That's mainly what we fished for was, buffalo and rough fish. And we'd like to be able to do that. We don't understand why it wasn't put in there as one of the gear types we was able to fish in the Beach River. But we've always been able to fish them before.
Again, if you'll just list that, send
Okay.
me an email and Carbon
Okay.
Bobby, and we can talk
Right.
about that.
All right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess I should have reiterated to everybody that they're just putting out the suggestions for the season setting. The sport fishing recommendations will be voted on in October, and some of the commercial fishing will be voted on in September. Well, some of it will be voted on in October also. So this is just opening up the comment period. Anything they're throwing out here, if you've got a suggestion or a comment, you can get on our site or call them. We'll include it in our recommendations. No other questions? Bobby?
Thank you, Commissioner. Back in January of this year, the Commercial Fishing Advisory Committee submitted a request for things for the commission to consider. And this is it. But I won't blind you with this, but I retyped it exactly as it was for the purpose of being over here because it didn't scan very well. But the first request was that discussions, meeting, and voting on all commercial fishing issues be held in summer months. And so that's what you just talked about a second ago, Commissioner Bledsoe. But we had a advisory committee meeting back on August 1st, and among other things, we presented to them our proposed recommendations that Eric just went over, and then we discussed these items here that have not been addressed yet, and then where we stood on that, and we had some pretty good discussion. And then they elected Ricky Scott as chairman too of the advisory committee. But so we did do the discussions in the summer as far as that was their request, and then we also are requesting that the commission vote on any changes for commercial fishing at the September commission meeting too. So number 2 on Asian carp, where they say we need gill net mesh size change. We did that back in February or March, I believe. And then also we need time change on the creeks and bays. We did adjust that too back at the same time. And then they asked for an extension of the open section of Duck River, and we discussed that and recommended no change on that. And on catfish, where they said we need size changes. And specifically, they requested for a 42-inch maximum length limit, which would mean they could only keep catfish up to 42 inches, but they would not keep any over 42 inches. But there would be no harvest over, but there was unlimited harvest under 42. Currently, we know we have a 34-inch maximum length limit with a limit of 1, where they can keep everything they want to under 34 inches, but they can only keep 1 per day over 34, which is the same regulation that the sport fishermen have. And I think when we discussed this back at the at the commission meeting, one of the things that I recommended was that this was actually back in the fall when we talked about this too, that we would like to get some information from fishermen to find out attitudes about how they felt about our current regulations. We had some information all the way back to 2001. It showed how they felt about managing catfish as a sport fish then, and also in 2006. And I'm going to give you some of those figures now. Back in 2001, the question was asked how they felt if catfish were managed as a sport fish. Back in 2001, they were not classified as a sport fish. They were still classified as a commercial fish. And we made that change shortly thereafter, but there was 45% of the people felt like it should be managed, 43% were opposed to it. In 2006, that had increased to 61% supporting that, and 29% opposed. So UT survey for fisheries was conducted in the fall of 2012, and we asked them to include a few questions dealing with catfish. And they were interviewed over 1,900 Tennesseans. Some were licensed, some were not, but there were 1,900 Tennesseans that were interviewed overall. 55% of them had fished for catfish over their lifetime. At some point in their life, they had fished for catfish. And 19.1% had fished for catfish during the spring and summer of 2012. And this is just a copy of the draft of the Tennessee Catfish Fishing and Catfish Anglers Management Preferences 2012. It was given to us by University of Tennessee. So one of the questions that was asked, do you support or oppose the current TWRA regulation which allows sport anglers unlimited harvest of catfish less than 34 inches and only one over 34? And we had 70.2% supported that, 16.6% opposed it, and the makeup of the other there. So when compared with the 2006 survey, there were 62.7% of the people with the exact same question supported it, but in 2012, that had increased to 70.2%. Ask the question, do you support or oppose the TWRA regulation which allows commercial fishers unlimited harvest of catfish less than 34 inches, but only one over 34? And there was not a lot of support for that, 44.2%. And in 2006, that was 57.4%, but it had decreased, the support had decreased to 44.2% in 2012. Would you support or oppose a regulation that would allow commercial fishers unlimited harvest of catfish less than 42 and no harvest over 42? This was in response to the recommendation of the 42-inch maximum length limit that was proposed by the Commercial Fishing Advisory Committee. And there's not a lot of support for that. Only 32.1% would support that. But another question was asked, I don't have a graph for this, but in general, do you support or oppose a commercial harvest of catfish in general? And in 2006, about 50% of the people supported it, but it actually increased to 58.0% in 2012. So it shows that they're okay with commercial fishing, but apparently they don't really want to go to a 42-inch rule. And which of the following statements best describe your opinion of catfish management in Tennessee? 61.3 were satisfied with our level, but 23.1 thought we should put more emphasis on catfish management. So it's about 80% were either happy with it or wanted more management. In response to this too, we also have contracted with Tennessee Tech University to do a research project, and it's already started, and it'll go through June of 2016. And they're going to look at Kentucky Lake, which is the largest catfish fishery, both commercial and sport, and Chickamauga, which is the next largest for both. And then they're going to look at Fort Loudoun, which has no commercial harvest for catfish and relatively light sport fishing pressure. So they're going to develop some sampling protocols for blue and channel catfish, and they're going to model the response of each population to different management scenarios in terms of yield, potential for overfishing, and production of memorable sized fish. So we'll address this again in a couple of years when Tennessee Tech has results of their catfish study. So in response to the request where they need size changes, and specifically to the 42-inch maximum, the UT survey, we got the results of that, did not indicate a lot of support from the sport anglers to change anything, and that we're conducting research from Tennessee Tech on a catfish study. And as well, our biologists, when they were presented with this information back in May, recommended no change in the catfish regulation at this time. Also, in regards to catfish, there was another one that said we need change in hoop net size. This is the picture you saw that Eric showed a minute ago, but currently the legal mesh size, which is the net mesh size, is 1 inch or smaller or 3 inches or larger. In other words, they can't use currently the 1 inch to 3 inch mesh size like a 2 inch, it would be illegal. And they asked us to reconsider that. And so we proposed to go to, initially we were going to go to 1.5 inch or larger. And then after some discussion with some of the commercial fishermen and our own biologists, they asked that we consider 1.25 inch. And even further discussion with that, we may even consider 1 inch and larger. And the reason for that is because a lot of people now that have the 1 inch mesh, it would put them in a financial burden to just immediately stop that and go to 1.25 inch or larger. We're talking about 1/4 inch. And they asked if we could phase the regulation in if we went to 1.25 over a couple of years to allow them to continue to use those 1 inch, but also over the next couple of years buy a few of these larger ones to allow them to be able to use them without having to just go cold turkey and start immediately from, because a lot of them have a lot of money tied up into these other size nets, and the 1.25 inch can be expensive when you buy several of them. So we're going to consider maybe just adapting that, amending that to 1 inch and larger, so that way there wouldn't be any phasing in, and it wouldn't be a financial burden on a commercial fisherman. And as Eric mentioned, we would not allow wings or leads to the hoop nets. Hoop nets are fished almost exclusively for catfish, by the way, and they typically put bait at the very end of it. And sometimes they don't. If it's in a river system, they would flow into it. But most of the times, I think they use bait to attract them in there. So in paddlefish, they requested to move forward with the study plan to open new waters and set a timetable for completion. There's been no action taken on that. And they also request the commission to help with the export problems. And Director Carter sent a letter to I believe, some officials in Washington, D.C., requesting to help them with that in some aspect. And in turtles, the request was, they said we need additional species for harvest. We recommend no change for what they can harvest now. And also they need additional areas open for harvest, and we recommend no change in that either. So that's basically the address and the request that the Commercial Fishing Advisory Committee had submitted back in January of 2013. That's all I got. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Bobby. Any questions from the commission? Any questions from the audience?
I don't have any questions, but I'd like to say something. I forgot to tell you my name. Ricky Scott is my name. But anyway, we appreciate the TWRA working with us on this hoop net change. Some of the reasons we want that, it's been 1 inch and smaller for years, 25, 30 years, and 3 inch and larger. Nobody hardly ever uses less than 1 inch because you catch too small a fish. You can't use them, and you just have to throw them back, all but, it takes too long to cull them. And nobody hardly uses much over 3 inch either, hardly ever, because you catch too big a fish, and it's above the size limit, so there's no reason to use those. But there's some of them are interested in, they're here down in Alabama, they're using 1 1/4 and larger, and they want to try that for a while, and some of them's wanting to try it, and they say you don't have to cull as many small fish then. It's a lot easier, and you don't catch these small ones, don't have a lot of bycatch or anything like that, so we want to try them. And also, some of the guys that's fishing for silver carp says they can use the 2 inch, maybe 1.5, 2 inch, they want to try them on these silver carp. They think they might be a real asset. They've heard that they would be, and they want to try them. And that's the reasons we're asking for that. And the commission, TWRA has really worked with us on this, and we appreciate it. And if we could get the 1 inch or larger for a couple of years and let the fishermen assess it and TWRA assess it and then visit it again, we might adjust it from there. But I think if we could do 1 inch or larger for 2 years and then revisit it, that'd be the perfect thing, and not make a decision until that 2 years over with, so everybody can see what's going on, TWRA and us too. Because we don't know what's going on because they've been illegal for years, anything between that. But we have a good idea that it's going to help color smaller fish, and maybe even the silver carp. Work good on those. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky, and we appreciate you serving on the advisory committee.
I just want to comment on that too. By the same token, we also want to check that out too, and see, make sure there's no detriment to the population going with this regulation too. So we may look at it again in 3 years. It's interesting, we looked at the surrounding states that allow commercial fishing with their hoop net regulations, and Kentucky, the state of Kentucky has 1 inch or bigger. Alabama has 1 1/4 inch and bigger. Arkansas has 1 1/2 inch and bigger, and Mississippi has 3 inches and bigger. So this regulation's been on our books for longer than any of us have worked for TWRA. And we know there was probably a really good reason. We think it's to protect game fish that could escape in this 1 to 3 inch mesh size, and maybe protect some of the catfish too. They might be able to get out the smaller catfish. But anyway, we're willing to try it, and so we'll give it a shot, I think.
All right. Any other questions from them? Need a pause.